Okay, hello everyone. So we would start day two of Selenium tutorials. So till yesterday we have covered all these topics like starting from Selenium architecture, how to create a driver, how to launch a browser, different browser commands, navigation commands, and also we saw how to handle different web elements like input box, button, image, link, checkbox, and radio button. So today we will see how do we handle dropdown, WebTable, alert, and frames. Okay, so let's get started. I've already created one class for day two. Public static void main is the method, and let me quickly copy the basic prerequisite that we have so that I would save some time. All right, and let me also import few packages that are required. Okay. All right. So we would use this demo application which we have been using since yesterday. So today we will see how to use or how to handle drop down or list box. Right. Uh, okay. Yeah, I think the URL is this. Okay. So on this particular page, we have different types of drop down. We have some old style drop down, we have some old style multi-select drop down, and some new type of drop downs as well, which we generally see these days on websites, right? So these drop downs are basically where when you click on it, you see the drop down options, and when you write something, it gets filtered accordingly, right? So now group one, if I mention, I see only those drop down values which are related to group one. So right, so these are little advanced or the latest style of drop downs. So we will see one by one each of them how to deal with this. So let's start with this old style select menu drop down, which allows us to select only one menu at a time. Okay, so let's inspect this, and you see the tag is select over here, correct? So let's first launch the page, and obviously let's add a wait of 5 seconds so that the page gets launched correctly, and then I would say, all right, so first thing that we need to understand for interacting with objects with HTML tag as select, or generally what we call it as drop down, is that we need to create an object of class select. Okay, only then you would be able to access the methods of this particular class. So I would say select drop down color equal to new select. In here I will mention driver dot find element, by dot, and I would say by dot id. Okay, and I will import select. Okay, let me copy this import package. Fine. Now if you see, if I use this object now, and if I press a dot, I will get a list of all methods that are available to use for this select object, right? So you see a lot of methods that are there, like deselect by index, deselect by value, deselect by visible text. Similarly, I have select by index, select by value, select by visible text. So we will see one by one, right? And we will see how this works. Okay. So let's start with select by index, which accepts one input parameter, which is called as int index, right? And it returns void. Okay. Why? Because it is just basically selecting a value. It is not returning or getting any value for you. So return type is obviously void. So what I'll do is I would say dot select by index, and let me give index as 2. Okay. Then similarly, I would say select by value. Okay, I have to give some value over here. You will see what that value would be. And then I would say select by visible text. Okay. Okay. So when I say select by index, right? So there are many options inside this select tag, right? So the option 1 starts with index 0, option 2 starts with index 1, option 3 you know uh, is index 2 basically, right? So on and so forth, right? One second. So when I say select by index 2, right, so it is basically going to select the value as green. Okay. And when I say select by value, so value is the attribute over here, which is value. And what is the value of this attribute value? Let's say if I say 6. Okay. So when I say select by value 6, it is going to select the value white from the drop down. Okay. So I say select by value 6, would select white, and select by visible text. Obviously, it is a text of the drop down value which it would take as an input parameter. Okay, and let me add a wait of 1 second at least, so that you can see the difference when these options are selected. Okay, and let me run this. Green, white, and aqua. Correct. So green was because the index was 2, select by index 2, it was green. Then we had select by value 6, it was white. And then select by visible text aqua, it is what it was selected finally as aqua, right? So you can also use one method which says get options. Okay, so what this is going to do is that it is going to return you a list of web elements having all the options inside that particular drop down box. Okay, and what we can do using that is, up to us. Okay, but I'll show you one way of using this option. Okay, so I would say get options. It is going to return me a list of web elements, right? So I would say list web elements. I would say list color equal to, and I will import this. Okay, so now this list, array list, or whatever list that we have seen in our collection framework session, right? It has a method called as size, isn't it? And all the values inside this list starts with index 0, correct? So I would make use of these two things, and I would traverse through each of those options inside this select tag. So I would say for int I equal to 0, I less than list color dot size, and then I plus plus. Okay, and here I would say drop down dot color select by index, and instead of giving a hard coded value of index 2, I would say I. So I would start with 0, and it will go until the size less than the size. Okay, so till the last value, and then it will also wait for 1 second in between. Okay, so now let me execute this and show it to you. Okay, let me comment out the lines which I don't need, and I will also add driver dot close. Okay, in the end. All right, so it has launched the page. It will wait for 5 seconds, and you see it is selecting each of that value one by one until the last option. So the execution is completed and it is working as expected. All right, so this is how you handle old style drop down, single option drop down object. Then we also have something called as standard multi-select. Again, this is an old style of doing this, but you know, nonetheless, we would see how to work with this. So standard multi-select is that you can click on one option, and if you want to select one more, you have to press the control key down and click on the other option which you want, and you can do that as many times as you want in terms of selecting the options. Correct. So now we will see how to do this using Selenium. Correct. Okay. So let's start with inspecting this object. So you see here, this is again a select tag. So I need to create an object of select class, which I've already done. I would, use this ID value Okay, I would replace this with the previous one. I would mention this as drop down car. It's cars. Okay, and then I would say, first of all, I want to check whether this drop down allows me to select multiple options or not. If it allows, then I can go ahead and select multiple one, right? So how do I check whether it allows me multiple selection? Is by using this method which says is multiple. Okay, if this is multiple returns true, then I would say, okay, let me use some previous commands, all right, and I would just do some basic modification. So what I'm going to do is this drop down cars, I would select multiple options. I would say 0, then I would say uh, value as sab, okay, and then finally with text as audi. All right. So what I've done is I've first created an object of that multi-select dropdown. Then I've checked whether that object allows multiple selection by using the method is multiple. If it returns true, then I would go ahead and select multiple options. So I've selected one option by index, the other by value, and the third one by visible text. Okay, simple. All right. So now let me execute this. So Volvo is selected, SAB is selected, and Audi is selected, right? So it works absolutely fine. Now similarly, how I've selected multiple, there is also an option to deselect, right? So I would say drop down dot deselect all. So we have a deselect all option, or deselect by index, deselect by value, deselect by visible text. Correct? And you also have one method which says get all selected options. Okay, so we will try a few methods of this. You get all selected options will return you a list of web elements. Correct? So let's try this first. I would say list web element, and I would say all selected option equal to, okay, and what I'll do is I will just print all of the options that I have selected. So let me see if I can uh, yeah, I'm just thinking if I can use for each over here, for each web element w, okay, in all select options, right, and I would say system out, say dot get, or w dot uh, okay, let me see, w dot get text. Yeah, okay, sure. So now this should work. So first I would select multiple options from the drop down. Then I'm using this get all selected options method to get a list of all the options that I've selected, and using the for each loop I'm printing the text of the values that I have selected. All right, so let me execute this. Volvo, Sab, Audi. Okay, so the execution is completed. Let us see if it has printed. Yes, Volvo, Sab, Audi. It has printed what we expected to get it print, so it's working fine. Then let's see uh, some more methods of this object. So it says deselect all, right? So it would basically deselect all the options that you have already selected, or you can say get first selected option. The get first selected option would basically return you a web element. Instead of a list of web element, it will return you only one web element, and then you can use dot get text to find out the value of the first option that you have selected. Okay, so you can try that on your own. Meanwhile, we will see deselect all. Deselect by index, deselect by value, deselect by visible text would work exactly the same way like the select one, which we have already seen. So I would rather try this deselect all, okay, and see how it works. I'm starting the execution. The browser is getting launched. Volvo, Sab, Audi, and then all of them have been deselected. If you saw, it happened in a fraction of a second, but it deselected all of them, right? So these are different options that are available for an object of select class. Okay, so now that we have seen how to interact with these old style drop downs, single option and multi-select option, we can now take a look at some of the drop downs which are pretty new and a little challenging to work with in terms of automation. So for example, let's take this, okay, wherein we have this option called select one and title, where you have to select title as Dr., Mr., Mrs., whatever. So in order to inspect this object, so if I say right click and inspect, you would first of all see that this is not a select tag, right? It is a div tag, right? So the select class object will not work for these kind of HTML tags. That is one thing. Second, if you expand this, you will see select title mentioned over here, but nowhere would you see the options that are visible inside this drop down, like Dr., Mr., Mrs., Miss. No, it's not there inside this select title, div tag. So now how would you work with an object like this? And if you try to inspect these options, let's say if I try to inspect Mr., okay, if I try to right click, the moment I right click, the drop down itself disappears. Okay. So how do you handle such kind of a thing? So first of all, you inspect the main object here. In this case, it is the select title. All right. Then on the right side, if you see, there is this event listener, right? Event listener. You have to click on it. Then there is an option called as blur. Okay. You need to expand that. And then you see inside the blur, there are two, sub options, document and window, and there are these remove button next to it. So you need to click on both of these remove button and remove both of them. All right. Now this would allow you to spy on the option that you want to select. So let's say I want to inspect or spy this Mr. option, right? So I would right click. Now you see the drop down is still there. It has not disappeared, and it will allow me to inspect this option now. So here you go. You have an option to select Mr. All right. So now what you would do is that you first of all write an XPath, okay, to identify this option uniquely. Okay. So I would say div text equal yes. So this works fine. So I will copy paste this over here. Okay, let me comment this out now for the time being. Because I don't need this line of code. Correct. Okay. So I would say driver dot find element by dot xpath. Mention the xpath that you have written, and you just say simply click. Okay. But before that, you also have to click on that select title, right? Because only then you would be able to see the drop down getting appeared, right? So I would say here same stuff, div text equal to yeah. So this also works fine. I would replace this HTML XPath over here. I would add a small wait of 1 second before it clicks the option. Okay. And I believe this should work fine. So let's execute this. Browser is launched. Navigated to the URL. The page is loading. And let's see what happens. Okay, it has clicked on it and it has selected Mr. as well. Okay, let me put a thread sleep after the selection so that we can see that it is actually working, right? Because it happens so fast, the execution is so fast that we may miss what has happened. So I'm rerunning the script. You see now Mr. has been selected and the browser will now get closed. Fine, so this was how you can work on drop downs which are a little complex to deal with, but once you know the workaround, it is a little, in fact it is even easier than using the select class object, because you don't have to create any select class. You simply have to use this click method to open the drop down and then click again to select the value from the drop down, right? So this was about working with the drop down, the normal, the multi-select, and the new one. Now let's quickly go to WebTable. Again, this is a very, very important web element, I would say, because you have to you know use your programming logic to work with web tables. I'll show you how. Okay, let me open the URL which has these web tables for practice. Okay, so here it is. So here is this page which has a web table which has 7 columns. 3 rows are filled and the 7 rows are blank. So there are total 10 rows, out of which 3 are filled with some data and the remaining 7 are blank. And let's say if you get an uh, if you have a test case which asks you to validate or to retrieve the the cell value for department for row number 1. Okay, so you want to extract this value and validate whether it is as per the expected value or not. So for this you need to work with WebTable. So let's see how to build our logic. So first of all, first and foremost, you have to inspect that element. Okay, so now if you see here, there is this one HTML tag which says rt-table. All right, and see if you see this rt-table, it actually selects the entire table that we want to work with. Correct? So now first thing that you need to do is you have to create an object of this rt-table. Once you create an object of this rt-table, uh, you know, then you would be able to access the elements inside that table. Okay, so what I do is I will simply create a web element object called as tbl or obj table equal to driver dot find element by dot xpath, or I would say by dot class. Okay, let's try with by dot class itself, and I would mention the class name value. Then if you notice, inside this table there is this rt-tr-group object. You see here, let me just zoom in. You have this rt-tr-group and the role is row group. Correct? If you see, so this signifies the individual row inside that table object. Correct? And if you see, uh, there are multiple rows, right? rt-tr group. And let me copy this rt-tr group, control F, and if I paste it, I can see 1 of 10, right? Why 1 of 10? Because it is one of the row out of the 10 rows, right? So there are 10 rows, that is why there are this object with class rt-tr-group as 10. And I want to iterate through each of these row first, and then I would iterate through each of the column to check what is the value under department for whichever row I want. Okay, so for now what logic I'm building is I would basically iterate through each of the row and column and print the value inside each cell. Okay, that is what I'm going to do right now. But according to your actual test case, you can modify. So let's say, for example, here initially what I told you is, if I have a test case that asks me to validate that under department the value should be insurance for row number 1. So if that is the case, you have to modify your logic accordingly. But more or less, what we are going to build right now would encompass the entire thing. Okay. So now let's go back to this. So rt-tr-group, this class has 10 similar kind of object. Okay. And that is exactly what I want. I want to iterate through each of the rows, right? So what I'll do is I would say obj table, which means the table object that I've created, dot find elements. Instead of element, I'm using dot find elements, the plural form. Okay. So what it will do, it will return me a list of web elements that matches the locator that I'm passing for this find elements. Okay. So in this case, I would say by dot class name, and I would say rt-tr-group. Okay. And this returns me a list of web elements, right? I would say obj rows. All right. So now obj rows will have 10 row object inside it, and I want to iterate through each of the row. Correct. So if I want to iterate, obviously I need to use certain loops, right? So I would say I would use for loop for int I equal to 0, I less than obj rows dot size, and then I plus plus. Okay. All right. Now inside the row, I want to iterate through each of those columns as well, right? So what we have done for finding the row, we have to do similar thing for finding the column. So now if you can see now here, again I'll zoom it. So rt-tr-group is a row group, correct? And inside that row there is another class which says rt-td. Okay. And if you see at the extreme right of that row, you have the value Sierra, then Vega, then 39. So basically, these are nothing but columns inside that row. So what I'll do now is I would similarly create an object for rt-td. Okay, it is now showing me the value as 1 of 70. Why 1 of 70? Because there are 7 columns and there are 10 rows. So there are total 70 objects that matches this class name as rt-td. Okay, so I would say a list of web element, and I would say obj column equal to, now what I have to do is I have to find these columns inside the row, right? So I would say find, okay, obj rows, but it should be obj rows dot get index. So the first row object inside obj rows will then find the elements which matches the class name as rt-td. Correct. rt-td, and I will say Okay, let's check objrows dot get I dot find elements. Yeah, find elements by dot class name rt hyphen td. Okay, great. So guys, I'll just repeat what I've done. You know, this may look complicated, but if you apply logic, basic understanding, you will, understand this very simply. So what I've done first is I have found out what is the table which I want to search the data, right? So we found out this is the table which has the class value as rt hyphen table. So I created an object of this particular driver dot find element by dot class name, and it returns me a web element object, right? So I've created a table object. Now inside this table, I want to find the number of rows. Okay, I want to iterate through each of those rows. So I want basically a list of rows, not just one row, but list of rows. So that is why what I've done is using this table, inside this table, I have used a method called as find elements. Okay, find elements by what? By class name that matches this value rt hyphen tr hyphen group, right? Which we saw here, rt hyphen tr hyphen group, correct? Which indicates one single row, correct? So since I'm using find elements, it is returning me a list of web element. That is why I have stored this in a list of a web element called as obj rows. So now obj rows, I have to iterate through each of this row for finding the list of all columns. So now I would start with index 0 of this obj rows. I will continue till the size, the last index of that row, and that inside that rows object, get the first row, which is get I, and inside that first row, find elements again, which has class name as rt hyphen td, meaning this column value. So first row, first column, like that I have to iterate through 7 different columns. So obviously find elements would return me a list of web elements again, this time for obj calls, right? Now if I want to use obj calls, correct, I have to say, first of all, I have to iterate through this column, right? So again I have to use for loop for int j equals 0, j less than obj calls dot size j plus plus. Okay, and here what I'll do is obj calls dot get the first index j dot get text, right? So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to access row number 1, column number 1, and then get text. Then I would say row number 1, column number 2, because the first iteration would happen for the column, right? 1 to 7 column. Then it will go to the second row, and then again for second row, column 0 to whatever 7, it will iterate. Like that, it will continue until the last row of that particular table. You're getting my point? All right, so we will see this now. I want to print it using system.out.println, and I would print something like this. Cell value in row number. What is the row number? I, right? Plus, I would say, and column number. What is the column? J, right? Is this. All right. So let's see if this works. Okay. Let's execute. Oops. I think I have given the wrong URL. So obviously it is going to throw me an error. The URL is of a different page. I think this is the one. Yeah. Okay. Cool. So now let's execute once again. Okay, so the execution is completed and let us see if the values is printed on the console or not. All right, so I think it has printed. So row number 0, column number 0 is Sierra, correct? Then row number 0, column number 1 is Vega, then the age 39, then the email ID Sierra at the rate example.com, then 10,000, department insurance, and column number 6, column this one doesn't have any value, right? It has some objects, isn't it? So obviously it didn't return any text value out of it. Similarly, after row number 2, row number 3 onwards till row number 9, it's blank, isn't it? So that is why it returned you as blank value. Okay. So basically this is how you refer a table, its row and column, and using your programming logic, right? Using your programming logic, you can access and do a lot of things on that web table. So if I want to, let's say, click on the edit button of the first row, right? So what I need to do is, just like how I access this particular text, you know, in the row number 1, like what I have done here, obj rows dot get dot find elements, and I've mentioned the class name of column. What I can do here is, let me spy this edit button. Okay. Yeah, let me, if you see this, let me expand a bit. Okay. Yeah, let me inspect this again. So if you see here, this object edit or edit record 1, right? So if I use find element and I say ID edit record or edit record 1, I would be able to create an object. So instead of find elements, I can say find element and I can give that specific, attribute or the locator. It will give me an object of a web element in that case. And instead of iterating through this, because it is no longer find elements, it is just one element, I can say, you know, obj edit dot click, and it would click on that particular edit button as well. Right? So this is how you have to try different ways of, working on different objects inside the web table. I've just showed you one wherein you can iterate through each row and each column and extract the value, the text value. But you can also play around with, how do I click on this edit button for row number 1? How do I click on this delete button of row number 1 or 2 or 3, like that, right? So that is something which you can practice, correct? So with this, we have completed, handling web tables, correct? Let's quickly see what are alerts and frames. So alert is basically a pop-up window that comes on our web page, and we have to switch to that particular alert window or the alert pop-up in order to handle it. Okay, so I'll tell you how. So this is the URL. Let me copy that first. Okay, so when you come to this particular page, you see there are different buttons over here. Okay, each button would give you a different type of alert pop-up. So if I click on this first one, it will give you a alert which says you clicked a button as the text and there is an OK button, right? Now, if you click on the second one, it will basically do the same thing, but it will appear after 5 seconds. So you have to add certain wait time, right? And then handle this alert. Then there is another button called as confirm, wherein you can either click on OK or you can click on cancel. Okay, earlier one had just OK button with no cancel. The third one had the option of clicking on OK and clicking on cancel as well. And the fourth alert has an option to also enter certain value in the text box, right? So these are different alerts that you generally see on a web page. So we will see how to handle, these alerts. So let's go with the first one. First, I have to click on this button, isn't it? So I would first mention a line of code to click on the button. Okay. And then I would say, I would also wait for a second for the prompt or the alert to come up. And now, if you see, if I click on this alert and if I want to spy this OK button, right, the right click itself doesn't work. I cannot, click on inspect, you know, if I if I right click on the OK button, nothing comes up. I cannot spy or inspect. If I right click on this, I don't get an option to click on inspect, right? So how do you deal with these kind of objects, right? So to handle such kind of situation, there is a method called as driver.switch to.alert, and inside this you have an option to select a method like accept. So accept basically would click on OK, dismiss would click on cancel, right? Get text would basically retrieve the text that is there inside that pop-up window, and send keys is basically to send certain inputs into that text box if it is available in the prompt window. All right, so let's start with this. I would say get text. Okay, and I would have this printed here. Okay, and then I would say driver dot switch to dot alert dot accept. Okay, because there's only OK button, right? So I can say accept. Then the second one is basically the same, but you just have to add 5 seconds wait time. So let's ignore that. The third one, confirm button, right? So, okay, let's go one by one probably. So first, let's see the alert button and how it works. Okay, and let me add this button accepted or alert accepted. Okay, yeah, so let me run this now. Okay, so here we go. It has printed, it says the text of that alert or the pop-up was you clicked a button, and I have printed alert accepted after clicking on OK. Okay, so you just want to confirm, click me, it says you clicked a button. So that text was extracted correctly and it has also clicked on OK button. Now the third one, which is a confirm button. Okay, so you have the text and you also have an option to dismiss it, right? So let's do that. Okay, the ID is confirm button, and instead of dot accept, I would say dot dismiss. All right, so let's execute this now. So do you confirm action? Okay, it has not clicked on cancel, is it? This is strange. Uh, all right, let's see what is the issue. Get text is fine. Why it didn't cancel? Let me refresh this page. Okay, so I would say inspect ID confirm button. Right, so confirm, get text. Let's make it 3 seconds wait. Okay, let me rerun this and let's figure out what is the problem. So it clicks on this. Okay, I think this time it worked. Yeah. So do you confirm action is the text and it says alert dismissed has been clicked. So earlier probably what must have happened is that synchronization issue. It clicked on the button and before the alert could come up, it tried to get text and tried to click on the dismiss button. So after adding a wait of 3 seconds, this worked perfectly fine. All right. So let's move on to the fourth button, which allows you to enter certain text as well. So we will take a look at that prompt button. First get text, then I would say driver dot switch to dot alert dot send keys, and I would say message has message has been entered. Okay, and instead of dismiss I would say accept this time. Okay, all right, so let's execute this. Okay, so please enter your name and alert accepted, right? So let's just wait, add a wait of 2-3 seconds before this page gets closed. Maybe 3 seconds wait so that we can see that the message has actually been entered. Okay, So it says you entered message has been entered. Okay, so the message was entered correctly and there is no issue in the execution. It has printed what we expected and this is working absolutely fine. So this is how you deal with alerts. Finally, we will see what are frames. Okay, this is again a very important topic because a lot of times we you know face this issue that although the objects are getting identified when we use the XPath on the HTML browser, but when we try to use that same locator in the dot find element method, it says unable to find that object. You may rack your brain throughout the day and you won't be able to figure out what is the problem, you know, until you know this concept of frames. All right. Okay. And before that, before we move to frames, one point I forgot to mention here is that when you say driver.switch to dot alert, what basically you are doing is you are changing the focus from this page to this particular alert. Okay. Once your job is done of interacting with alert, it is important for you to again switch back to the default content, meaning switch back to the browser itself, right? Because if you miss this particular line, if you miss this particular line, and then if you try to find any element which is there on the browser, it will throw you an error saying that unable to find so and so element. Why? Because Selenium would think that you are trying to find this element on the alert window, right? Because you have switched to alert and you haven't switched back to the default content. So Selenium would think that you are trying to find this element on the alert itself, right? So make sure that you switch back to the default content so that you can access the elements on the browser. Okay. All right. So coming back to the frames topic, right? So we will see what frames are and I'll try to explain you how this is important. Frames. Okay. So frames is nothing but it's like a container inside an HTML document, and that particular container holds certain objects inside it. And if you want to access those objects inside the container, you have to first switch to that container or that frame first and then access those objects inside it. All right. If you try to access that object directly, you know, although on the HTML document, if you find that object using the locator, you would be able to see that it is getting highlighted correctly. It is also one of one, so the attributes or the locator detail that you have provided is unique. But when you actually use it on dot find element on your Eclipse, you will get an error saying that no such element found or whatever, right? So you might wonder why is it not, getting identified. So the problem would be that this particular element is located inside a frame. So for that, you need to first switch to the frame, just like how we saw how to switch to an alert, right? Similarly, you also have to switch to a frame, and then inside that frame, you have to find an element, whichever you want to access inside it. All right, so we will see now what this is. So let's say this is a frame, okay? This is a frame and this is again another frame, okay? So I want to, access this text, all right? So I would right click, inspect, and you see we have this, what do you say, this text, isn't it? So I would say ID sample heading. Okay, I'm able to find it, right? But if you see here, let me expand this a bit. If you see here, it falls under an iframe. So this is an important tag that you need to remember. If there is any tag called as iframe, and if you are accessing any object inside that iframe, then you have to first switch to this frame and then try to access this. All right. So another way to find out whether this object is falls under iframe or not is that by using this copy full XPath, paste it over here. Uh, okay, it doesn't show, right? Okay. Sometimes you get that entire XPath and you also see that iframe in that hierarchy. But nonetheless, you can also scroll this HTML document and see if it falls under iframe or not. Okay. So let's copy this first, copy XPath, uh, and I'll show you how to switch to the frame. I mean, it's again similar to the alerts, but let's see this. Driver.switch to dot frame. Here it says frame index or frame name or ID. Okay, so I will go with frame name or ID because there is a frame ID that I've seen here. Okay, which says frame 1. All right, so I would say frame 1 dot find element by dot XPath, and I would copy the XPath. Okay, sorry, it was H1, is it? Okay, so instead of giving any specific tag, HTML tag, you can also use star. So basically it will search for all the tags which has this ID as sample heading, and then I would say get text. All right, and I would print it over here. Okay, so now let's execute this. Again, I'm sorry, I forgot to change the URL. Let's stop this. Okay. All right, so now let's execute again. All right, so let's check the console. It has successfully extracted the text which says this is a sample page. Okay, so now there are two frames in this particular browser, right? This is one and then this is two. Let's say I want to access this text as well, correct? So here you see the frame is called as frame ID, frame 2. The ID is frame 2, right? So now what I need to do is if I say driver dot switch to dot frame and ID as frame 2, okay, and then if I say find element by dot XPath, all right, and I do the same stuff over here, okay, I'll show you what happens in this case. Okay, XPath, this object, copy XPath. All right, so now what is going to happen? It is going to, I believe it is going to throw an error. Let's see. And I'll tell you why. Okay, let us see what has happened. Okay, so the first, frame text has been extracted, but the second one it says no such frame exception, no frame element found by name or ID frame 2, correct? But when we inspected, we could clearly see there is a frame by the ID value as frame 2. Then why did it say that no frame element found by name or ID frame 2? The reason is we had initially switched to frame 1, right? And then this frame 2 is a different frame outside this frame 1, isn't it? So first, after I switch to frame 1, I have to come back to the default content, right? Driver.switch to dot default content. So I'm back to the browser, and from browser I'm switching to frame 2 this time. Earlier what I was trying to do is I was first at frame 1 and directly I was trying to switch to frame 2. So Selenium was thinking that it needs to search frame 2 inside frame 1, and that is where it said that it was unable to find any frame by the name or ID frame 2. But now when we have added this statement which says switch to default content, then it should work as expected. Okay, let's try this now. All right, so the execution is completed and you see it has extracted the text from both the frames this time. All right, so this particular statement of switch to default content is very, very important. Okay, so now one last thing we will see is that is of nested frames. So nested frames, as the name suggests, it is actually a frame inside another frame. Okay, so what we did here initially by mistake, or we were trying to search frame 2 inside frame 1 without switching to the default content, is exactly what is called as nested frame. Okay, so we will see that now. We will navigate to this particular URL, nested frames, and you see there is one parent frame, and inside parent frame there is a child frame. All right, so let's first navigate to the parent frame. ID is frame 1, correct? So same stuff. Frame 1 is where we want to navigate first. Inside frame 1, there is this text that I want to access. Copy XPath. Okay. I'm sorry. Yeah. Okay. And then we will see how do I nest inside the child frame. Okay. Let me execute and see if this works first. All right, so I think the execution is completed and it was able to access the text. So now, if I want to switch to the nested frame, okay, so what I can do is I would say frame one, so driver dot switch to dot frame one, and then I would say dot switch to again dot frame again, and then I would say what is the frame ID of this child frame. Let's see this. Okay, so I don't see any ID here. So what I would suggest is I would use frame index. Okay, so the index here would be 0 because there is just one frame inside the parent frame, right? So I would do that and then dot find element and copy XPath. All right. Yeah. So this should work perfectly fine. Okay. So now let's see this. All right. So on the console, it has now printed child iframe. Okay. So now from child frame, if I want to go directly to my browser, I would say driver.switch to .default content. But let's say instead of going to the browser, I want to switch to my parent frame. All right. So in that case, there is a method called a switch to parent frame. So this will actually not switch me directly to the browser, but I would switch to my frame, which is frame 1 in this case, right? And then here if I say uh, find element by dot xpath, let's execute this now. Perfect. So it has first extracted the child text, then it has switched to the parent frame and extracted the parent frame text, and then finally it has closed the browser. So before that, we can also, without fail, switch to default content and end our test case. So with this, we have completed handling frames as well. Thank you so much for joining. We will meet in the next video.